Hello. Thank you for joining us. We're proud to welcome you to our special series, In Chains, brought to you by Brill, where we talk about the history and the current state of slavery and human trafficking. I'm your host, Lee John Greco. Today we're speaking with Dr. Alexis Jonathan Martig. He's an adjunct professor at University of Alberta and an instructor at MacEwan University. He's also author of Slaving Zones, Contemporary Slavery and Citizenship. Dr. Martig, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Yeah, hi, good morning.
So first of all, what is a slaving zone? Are they bound by geography?
So the concept of slaving zone is a concept which was defined by Jeffrey Finpole in order to describe how into a specific geographical area there was a given society's demands for slaves, and there were limits about the conditions of who you were able to enslave or not. So progressively, we have seen through history the emergence of Christian and Islamic blocs through the empires of mostly in Europe. And we have seen the conditions enabling and allowing to enslave some people change progressively. So it was not possible anymore to enslave someone into your own empire. So this is how progressively Jeffrey Finpole has described the emergence and appearance of slaving zone and no slaving zone, because at first you were able to enslave people no matter the place, no matter the society, the empire, etc. And with the first empires through history, so progressively, you normally weren't able to enslave people inside your own empire. But the point was that truly there were still enslavement going on regarding political conditions or economic conditions. But progressively, with the emergence of the empires based on religion, with Christianity and Islamic religion, what happened is that into these empires, it was completely impossible and forbidden to enslave you fellow citizen and you co-religious citizens. So this is exactly the definition of a slaving zone emerging through history, places where you weren't able to enslave people anymore. And at the same time, so the boundaries of the empire were geographical, exactly, but at the same time that you were not allowed to enslave people into your own empire, the boundaries outside were the slaving zone. So you were able to go and to take someone from another religion, another empire, and enslave them. So this is how progressively through history we have seen the appearance of slaving zones and no slaving zones, places where you were able to completely enslave people and places where you were completely not allowed to. So you didn't have the right to. So this is very interesting. What is mostly interesting is progressively also to try to understand how can we today talk about modern day slavery, because we have progressively passed through history through the anti-slavery movement, also with the emergence of the human rights after World War II. We have passed today into almost theoretically a global no slaving zone, because today this idea of the slaving zone developed by Jeffrey Finpole, which was based on the fact that people were sharing co-religious ethos into Christian and Islamic empires. Today, the ethos is global. The ethos which forbid people to enslave other people is human rights or humanitarianism, which forbid people to enslave other people. And this is completely global. So the point is, what is modern day slavery? Can we still speak of modern day slavery when we know that we are living in a global no slaving zone? And can we still apply the concept of slaving zones today? And if we do, can we based it on geographical boundaries. So this is what is truly interesting about the concept of slaving zone, trying to apply it on today's situation, which is, again, a global no slaving zone, at least based on the ethos of human rights, which is that we are not allowed to enslave other people. We have to respect the rights of every people on earth worldwide. And also the fact that progressively, also the legal status of slavery has been almost completely abolished worldwide. So in this context, what is slavery? What is modern day slavery? And can we still use the concept of slaving zones based on the same criterions, which were basically geographic boundaries?
Yes, so let's focus on Brazil. Can you talk about specific cases of exploitation described as slave labor in Brazil today?
So in Brazil today, actually, you will find modern day slavery in the majority of the states, Brazilian state, both in rural as in urban area. And this is very significant. Brazil is a very interesting case because it's not one of the country when you find the most important number of modern day slavery, but that's a country who has led different plans to fight modern day slavery through at the federal level as at the scale of different states through different bills and different plans, etc. And the UN acknowledged that the Brazil was a leader into fighting modern day slavery, mostly during under the presidency of Lula da Silva, and after that Dilma Rousseff. Of course, it has changed a lot since that. But mostly you will find modern day slavery in Brazil in the majority of the states, and if different forms of work, mostly civil construction, textile manufacturing, rural work, migrant workers, which are going to work in producing coal, for example, or are going to work in cutting sugar cane, or are going to go into Amazonia to prepare the lands for the exploitation with beef, etc. You will also find it in meat production, etc. If you take just here the example we have taken, meat production, textile manufacturing, and civil construction, all of these occur in a urban area, and the rest is occurring in rural areas. So it's almost everywhere in Brazil, and there are even maps, official maps of what they call trabalho escravo, which will be enslaved labor here. So it's official. There are official data of modern day slavery in Brazil. And if you want to see how this situation illustrates what we just have said about the criteria of the new slaving zone based on mostly symbolic and economic precariousness, you will see that most of the people who are working in civil construction and or rural work are rural migrant workers coming from rural areas, and which again are seen and constructed as others, inferiors, because coming from the country, and this has been very strong in the construction of the Brazilian society. So this is something which is developed into the text. We don't have the time to go in further detail here, but this is something very important to understand, that these citizens are easily exploited through civil construction, rural work, and meat production also. About textile manufacturing, what is interesting is that it's mostly Bolivian people who are coming into Brazil in order to find to flee economic precariousness from Bolivia. So they are going there, and mostly Bolivian are exploiting other Bolivian through a specific form of relationships which are developed through the people which are in charge of the the manufacturers of textile. So they are going to be the godfathers of the workers. So there are specific personal relationships which are developed. So it's a very specific system here, but it is interesting to see how it works with others, the foreigners. So that will be mostly what we can see today in Brazil. And again, what is interesting is that in Brazil, we are talking of a post-slavery country, one of the country which has used the most important number of slaves through history during the transatlantic slave trade. And what is interesting is to see that today, modern day slavery, for example, is not only and not exclusively and basically based on racist criteria. So there are other criteria at play. Still, it's complex because these people who are poor mostly are of darker skins, colors of skin. So it's all interconnected. There are a question of intersectionality here between social classes and color of the skin. But the criteria of the transatlantic slave trade was mostly relying on the color of the skin. And here it's more complex. It's more economic precariousness, which was inherited from the past slave society, Brazilian society. So you can see here the interaction between the, uh, the context, today's context, global context of this global economic neoliberal situation, capitalism, which is articulating with the past inheritance of the past slavery in Brazil in order to give rise to new forms of modern slavery. So this is very interesting because all these people we are talking about from India, from Brazil and other developing countries, we have to understand that what they are producing is completely embedded into the global commodity chain. So mostly what they are going to produce, we are going to participate to it into the global north. We are going to buy it, or we are going to buy some things which are related to the global commodity chains these people are exploited into. So this is what is truly interesting here with modern day slavery, that it's completely functional with capitalism, and which is also most interesting, that capitalism is based on the idea of free labor. That's the myth of capitalism. So what is truly very interesting here is that we can see that we have millions of people who are exploited through modern day slavery conditions, and it's completely functional with a system which defend the very idea, the myth, we could say, of free labor. So this is something which is very interesting to study, understand, even if it's also very sad for all these people who are exploited through conditions which are similar to past slavery when it was legal, even if today, again, it's condemned at a global scale, legally at least.
That's interesting. That leads me to my last question. You mentioned that slavery and capitalism are actually well paired here. So if you live in a democratic society, you expect all citizens have equal rights and that slavery is banned. But as you described, that's not really the case in Brazil. So what does that tell us about what kind of rights are actually guaranteed in a liberal capitalist democracy?
Well, what is interesting is that that's not exactly the case in Brazil, and that's the case in Brazil. And that's mostly what is important here to highlight if we want to understand the very conditions which enable to enslave some people in modern days conditions today, so which are from the same society. So this is because officially all Brazilian citizens have the same rights. And as we said for India, also comparing, there is no more legally, there is no more possible discrimination based on the caste system. But still, it happens, still it occurs, because we have been relying too much on the efficiency, the performativity, and the ability of legal rights to be implemented. So it's not because we abolished some forms of discrimination. It's not because we said that everybody was equal that they are in real life, in the day-to-day life. And this is something which is interesting, because if you look at today liberal capitalist democracy, you will see that, and this is something which is not new, which has been highlighted by the Indian politicist Partha Chatterjee. There is a gap between the formal official equality through rights and the real inequality of the day-to-day life. We are affirming that people are equals, and because we are affirming that people are equals, we believe that it's done, but it's not. And it's not because behind that there is a capitalist system which is based on the idea that we have done a social contract based on free labor, so that capitalism is organized on the very basis of the social contract. And this is a complete myth, because the choices here, we have just talked about the economic precariousness, which is leading people to accept and compelling people to accept conditions of work which are similar to past slavery. So where is the freedom here of choice first, and then into the condition of work, if we said that they are similar to past slavery, so there are forms of unfreedom into these forms of labor, which are completely, again, functional into these global commodity chains. So it's not working. There is a discourse of equality, but beyond that, there is a capitalist system which is allowing and which is completely functional and working with forms of exploitations which are similar to slavery. So this is truly problematic here. So if you look today at numbers which are given, and this is significant, because if you look at the numbers from, for example, the NGO World Free, you will see that there is today 150 billions of annual illegal profits from modern day slavery. It's a lot. And that represents also 25 millions of people worldwide exploited in modern day forms of slavery, which usually are completely functional into the global commodity chains. So there is a true problem here between the different scales we are considering. If you look at these different forms of societies which are exploiting some citizens and which are theoretically egalitarian societies. So again, take the case of Brazil, take the case of India. So there is a problem here between the fact that they are saying that everybody is equal and still the form of capitalism, which is each time specific because it's articulated with specific histories in Brazil, in India. And this is going to lead to forms of exploitation which are denounced and are similar to past slavery. So this is problematic. There is a gap between the discourse and the day-to-day life. And then we have also to relocate it at the global scale. And this is how we understand that there is no true liberal capitalist democracy today. It's just a myth. That's based on the myth of economic freedom, political and economic freedom. Because even if you take the cases of countries from the north, so there it's more complicated, because the way these countries were constructed and constructed citizenship is stronger, which means that they won't exploit their own citizens. They are going to exploit more human trafficking, and they are going to exploit foreigners through migratory policies, as we just described before. But still, we could question here the true freedom and liberty of people into these countries, because you are educated and raised in order to to feed or to supply a market of labor and just work. And it will be interesting to consider the question of the debt into this country. So where is the true freedom of choice of labor into such capitalist systems? So it's a huge question. But it's important to, and we don't have the time to answer it today, but it's important to acknowledge it in order to truly understand this phenomenon of modern day slavery, both in its most significant and important forms of expression in developing countries, but also to question the very freedom of capitalist democracies which are into developed countries. Because still in these countries, also we could question the true freedom of choice and the true social contract here between the different actors in place.
Dr. Martig, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. That's a great, that's a very significant topic we are talking about. It's important that people hear about. And thank you so much for the work you are also doing with this podcast. It's a great job.
Dr. Alexis Jonathan Martig. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Alberta and an instructor at Makiwan University, and author of Slaving Zones, Contemporary Slavery and Citizenship. You are listening to the Humanities Matter podcast. You can find more podcast episodes on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast.